Every morning, Martha and I enjoy the precious moments in bed that follow the alarm clock. Over the years, we have found out what suits us best, but for these blissful minutes spent in warmth and laziness, you have to pay with a frenzied struggle to prepare for the upcoming day. In the past, this frenzied struggle included a chaotic race to get our children ready for school, but now that our 2 children no longer live under our roof, we increasingly linger in bed, enjoying these quiet moments before the whirlwind of the morning rush before setting off on our daily journey to work. The situation was aggravated by the fact that I had to leave the house a full 20 minutes earlier than usual. Martha had a long day at work ahead of her, which meant we could no longer drive my car together given our proximity to each other. So, I decided to get to work on my trusty mountain bike. In addition, the weather forecast promised a magnificent spring day. After tasting the last toast and clearing my palate with a sip of coffee, I felt ready to hit the road. "I'm already leaving, my love," I exclaimed, heading for the bathroom where Martha was still engrossed in her occupation. I stood outside the door, patiently waiting for her to appear and acknowledge my presence, but there was no response. After a short pause, I decided to deliver my message at all costs. "See you tonight." "I love you," I murmured. Time was slipping away, and I couldn't afford to dwell on the lack of a response from Martha. I hurriedly threw the keys into my backpack and left the house as Frank McKay, the 53-year-old office manager of the state's Department of Public Works. I couldn't afford to be late. At the same time, my wife Martha, 49, was an administrative assistant in the main office of a manufacturing company. It's worth noting that we both had above-average looks. Martha is simply stunning, to say the least. She looks much younger than her age, attracting the attention of numerous men when we walked together. As we continued our walk, I was interrupted by the sound of a whistle, meaning that a text message had arrived on my phone. After a few moments, my mobile phone started ringing, making it difficult to focus on moving through the busy streets while cycling. Following the rules of the road, I refrained from answering the phone until I got to work. Although I managed to get to my place of work on time, the rush associated with preparing for the meeting at 8:45 made me forget about the mobile phone that I accidentally left in my backpack. Ignoring the phone calls, I decided to have lunch with a group of colleagues. It was only during the afternoon coffee break that the memories of missed calls surfaced in my memory. To my surprise, a total of 5 messages came from Martha, consisting of 2 text and 3 voice messages. The first message I received at 8:10 a.m. informed me that I had the wrong set of keys and urged me to call her. The second message sent at 8:35 a.m. said impatiently that she was looking forward to my call. Curious, I listened to the voicemail. The first message left at 8:11 a.m. began with a warm greeting. "Hello dear, you took the wrong bunch of keys by mistake before you left. Could you drop them off at my place of work this morning? I'll need them. Please call me." Her tone was a little harsh, and I couldn't figure out why. In fact, she doesn't need keys at her workplace because it uses a modern security system with a key card. The second voice message came at about 10:05 a.m. "What's going on, Dave? I've been waiting for the keys all morning. Please call me. I have more important things to do than wait for you." I had the pleasure of knowing Martha for over 25 years, and I was her husband for 23 of those years. Her intense disappointment was palpable in every word she uttered. Her voice radiated antagonism and contempt. Before answering her last voice message, I took the keys out of my backpack and carefully placed them on the table. At exactly 12:55 p.m., I started listening to her message. The content was simple but demanding. She asked where I was and expressed impatience for the return of the keys. I couldn't figure out what thoughts were occupying my mind during the day, but it was extremely important that these keys were on her desk this afternoon. This time, Martha's anger burst out without any restraint. Her voice almost turned into a scream. I stood there, amazed. Over time, I got used to Martha's unreasonable anger directed at me. Approaching the age of 50, I thought that maybe she was experiencing bodily changes that fueled her erratic behavior. When I expressed this idea and suggested seeking medical advice, she brushed it off, rebuking me. Lately, communication with Martha has become a huge problem. Our relationship became strained, but it was ridiculous to see such an explosive reaction because of a set of keys that she didn't need. I made an effort to improve myself and realized that I could also participate in the anger game. Instead of contacting her right away, I decided to wait until 5 o'clock to return those ill-fated keys to her. As soon as the clock struck 5, I hurried to Martha's workplace. To my surprise, she had already pulled out of the parking lot and was heading home. Despite the busy roads and the capabilities of my bike, I was unable to catch up with her. Trying to overtake her was pointless because we were both heading home. Anticipating that she would soon break out of the congested traffic and accelerate beyond my capabilities, I decided to take my usual, more direct route to overtake her. I didn't expect to be caught off guard just a few moments later when I noticed that her car had turned into another area of the city. This alternative route was more convenient for me, allowing me to comfortably take a shortcut through the park. But I knew that this would not be the most effective way for Martha. When I saw her turn onto a street lined with numerous two-story duplex houses, she parked her car at the curb. With a growing sense of suspicion, I decided to take my time, carefully watching her every move from afar. As she climbed the stairs, her fingers danced across the phone screen, engrossed in conversation. The sound of the text message reached my ears, even though I was standing in front of a parked bike. I watched curiously as she read the message, and her expression subtly changed. Suddenly, she took a step back and headed for her car, driving away quickly. I was overcome with confusion, and I asked myself the burning question, what the hell just happened? Martha, who was supposedly busy with work, mysteriously arrived at an unfamiliar apartment. Determined to get to the truth, I clutched a bunch of keys in my hand, eager to investigate further. When I looked at the car and house keys in my hand, I immediately recognized them, but there was an unfamiliar key among them. Deep down, I suspected that this was the missing key that Martha was so desperately looking for. Determined, I headed for the duplex, purposefully climbing the stairs with a confident hand. I inserted the key into the lock of the front door, feeling a sense of completion when I turned it. There was a ringing click, which meant the final end of my marriage with Martha. But I didn't want to open the door right away. I needed time to gather my thoughts and decide what to do next. My anger grew, tempting me to invade my wife's lover's apartment and wreak havoc on his belongings. I had a choice: confront him and let him taste his own medicine, or choose a more responsible path, go to the police station, and face the consequences of my actions. Acting in blind rage was the wrong decision, but I knew I couldn't just do nothing. Looking into the apartment, I realized that I was technically trespassing. But if I acted quickly, I might be able to avoid being caught. Looking around, my gaze fell on a neat stack of letters lying on a small table in the hallway. I quickly grabbed the phone bill, not knowing who Steve Mueller was but realizing its potential usefulness. Having secured it in my backpack, I prepared to take the next step in this uncertain journey. By that time, I had gathered enough information and was careful not to be caught spying in someone else's apartment to avoid undesirable consequences. I quickly left the scene. Instead of heading straight home, I turned aside and drove to the nearest hardware store. It took me only a few minutes to purchase a duplicate key, the most important tool in my plan. Expecting to see Martha, I was surprised to find her missing. Her car was not visible in the driveway. Not knowing the content of the message that her lover sent her by SMS, I realized that it must be a message urging her to meet elsewhere. Intrigued, I decided to play a game with Martha. I tried to contact her by phone, but my attempts went unanswered. Deciding not to leave a text message, I left her a voicemail. After a short pause, the answer came: "There's no need for that. I have already taken other measures. I just came out of my office." "Just go home," she replied quickly. In her mind, she probably added, "Please leave me alone, you idiot." My evening was terrible. Martha didn't get home until 10 o'clock, giving me a generous 4-hour window to think about what to do next. At first, I wanted to get proof of her infidelity. The presence of a copy on the keychain made it possible to easily accomplish what was planned. It is noteworthy that the phone bill revealed her affair without outside help. They were constantly calling and texting, not paying attention to the evenings when Martha and I were together. Naively, I believed that she communicated exclusively with our children. Did I really need an explanation for her departure? No, it didn't matter anymore. Our love had weakened over the past 6 months. Unable to withstand such indifference, after countless reproaches and constant nagging, a man's love eventually begins to weaken. It only recently dawned on me that my affectionate wife was gradually leaving our marriage, and so far, this fact had been hidden from me. Today's revelation dealt a devastating blow to our already troubled relationship, confirming that we had reached a breaking point. We had come to the end of the road in our jurisdiction, where irreconcilable differences serve as grounds for divorce and lead to a fair distribution of our common property. Filing a claim for adultery would not give any advantages, but I, as a grieving husband who was betrayed by his wife, longed to regain at least some semblance of self-respect. I would not tolerate Martha's dishonesty during our marriage. The consequences of her actions would be brought to the attention of our children, parents, and friends. Given the recent changes in Martha's behavior, I wouldn't be shocked if she tries to present me in some negative light. Although I had thoughts of revenge, I eventually decided not to go down that path. Early retirement was only a few years away, and I didn't want to jeopardize the future I imagined. The pension that I imagined with Martha wouldn't be the same anymore. By choosing an alternative that would be preferable to ending up in prison and risking losing my job, I found solace in the prospect of enjoying retirement on my own terms, rather than succumbing to Martha's desires. Preparing for Martha's inevitable annoyance upon returning from a date, I hoped it would eventually work in my favor. Perhaps her displeasure would provoke a small disagreement that would justify my detached demeanor in the coming days. Surprisingly, the intimate encounter with Steve seemed to have calmed her anger to some extent. As I became more observant, I noticed that she had imperceptibly looked away from me upon Martha's arrival. Her surprise was obvious as she discovered that I was still occupying the living room. Without pausing, she casually tossed the spare car key into a specially designated container by the door and quickly took out her personal keychain, which I had put there earlier. After one glance at the keys, she quickly put them in her purse. Expecting a disparaging remark, I was stunned when she remained completely silent. With unwavering determination, she headed straight for the bathroom. "I'm tired," she said to an unknown person in the hallway. "I'm going to clean up and go to bed." In complete disbelief, I intervened. "What's the matter?" The lack of affection between us became apparent the night before when Martha, without saying a word, retired to the bathroom and closed the door. It seemed strange to me, and on reflection, I realized that this often happens after her late work shifts. Regret gripped me when I realized my own stupidity. It became clear why Martha was moving further and further away from our marriage. Before going to bed, I turned on the TV, hoping that Martha had already fallen into a peaceful slumber. But a nagging feeling told me that she was still awake, struggling with her own insomnia. The next morning, we both decided to solve these problems under the guise of a meeting so that we could discuss our crumbling relationship. I left work earlier than the scheduled time, deciding to stop at an electronics store instead. There, I pampered myself and acquired some intriguing items. When I got to Miller's apartment, it took me only a couple of hours to successfully mount the necessary wiring for sound and image. Such a long stay in the apartment allowed me to examine the surrounding environment. The interior was tastefully furnished and exuded elegance. Numerous objects that seemed to be exquisite antiques caught the eye. I have not been able to find out if Miller hired a maid, but his living space was spotlessly clean, without the slightest trace of dust. I couldn't help but think that cleanliness is of paramount importance to him. This certainly provided enough food for thought. I was hoping that my inconspicuous spy equipment would go unnoticed for a while, and I would have enough time to take some compromising pictures of my wife and lover. But I soon realized that my fears were unnecessary. When I returned to the office after lunch, I received a message from Martha saying that she would be late after work due to another late meeting. This prompted me to schedule an appointment with a lawyer the next day. Later that evening, as I was passing by Miller's apartment, I noticed Martha's car parked outside the house. Despite the whirlwind of emotions I had experienced over the past day, I still had a sense of satisfaction. I felt my heart ache again, a painful reminder of her betrayal. Tomorrow was of great importance. I returned home, considering the idea of staying at a local motel, but it seemed unwise to me to incur such expenses when I was not to blame for anything. After returning home, I briefly thought about spending the night in the guest bedroom, but eventually decided that I was not to blame for the breakdown of our marriage. Let Martha take this room in a fit of frustration. I casually moved all her things into the guest bedroom, leaving them in a mess. I carefully collected all the drawers, putting them on the bed, and began to collect clothes from her side of the closet, adding them to the general pile. Completing this task brought a sense of calm and comfort. With each armful of things I carried into her room, my mood lifted. Later in the evening, when she returned home, her appearance seemed even more haggard compared to the previous evening. It seemed like she had just gone through a stressful 5-hour meeting. When she saw me, her surprise became obvious again. She didn't try to justify her tardiness or disheveled appearance, as if there was no plausible explanation for it. My heart ached again, a painful reminder of her betrayal. Tomorrow was of great importance. I returned to the house, considering the idea of staying at a local motel, but it seemed unwise to me to incur such expenses when I was not to blame for anything. After returning home, I briefly thought about spending the night in the guest bedroom, but eventually decided that I was not to blame for the breakdown of our marriage. Let Martha take this room in a fit of frustration. I casually moved all her things into the guest bedroom, leaving them in a mess. I carefully collected all the drawers, putting them on the bed, and began to collect clothes from her side of the closet, adding them to the general pile. Completing this task brought a sense of calm and comfort. With each armful of things I carried into her room, my mood lifted. Later in the evening, when she returned home, her appearance seemed even more haggard compared to the previous evening. It seemed like she had just gone through a stressful 5-hour meeting. When she saw me, her surprise became obvious again. She didn't try to justify her tardiness or disheveled appearance, as if there was no plausible explanation for it. My heart ached again, a painful reminder of her betrayal. Tomorrow was of great importance. I was amazed at the pain I brought. Since the impending divorce weighed on our thoughts, I impulsively took her hand and led her towards the bedroom. Confused and upset, she whispered, "Frank, what are you doing? You're hurting me." Despite my uncertainty, I forced myself to speak confidently. I knew I was on the verge of losing her, and I needed to act quickly and keep my composure. Unfortunately, I let out hurtful words, raising my voice in a completely uncharacteristic way, as if I was capable of causing physical harm in an instant. The accusing looks that had been directed at me over the past few months turned into an expression of fear, but the nature of this fear remained unclear. Was it the fear of physical violence or the fear of some kind of exposure? I silently pondered this question, realizing that it would be useless to look for an answer. Instead, I began to unlock the door to the guest bedroom, revealing the neatly arranged things that belonged to her. "From now on, this room is yours," I announced sternly. "As of tonight, we are no longer husband and wife," I warned her, emphasizing the need for distance. "To tell you the truth, it would be wise if you packed up your things and left immediately." Martha's irritation and anger were palpable as she fought the urge to run out of the room. No way," she spat, her voice filled with contempt. "If anyone should sleep in the guest room, it's definitely you," she said. "I'm exhausted, taking care of the children, taking care of you, and running the household. It's time for you to show respect or just leave this house." Did I really want to get into a heated argument with her? No. I forced her back into the guest room, surprising both of us with the intensity of my actions. "I'm offering you 2 options," I growled, my voice full of disappointment. "Either you stay here until our divorce is finalized, or—" Martha's world turned upside down when the words escaped my lips. "You should go live with Steve Mueller right now." His name had an effect on her akin to a karate chop. Despite our recent intense communication, Martha still had an unyielding understanding of who I really was. She understood perfectly well that I had found out about her infidelity and that I had no intention of forgiving her. Our relationship was irretrievably destroyed, leaving no room for reconciliation or even friendship. How can you keep in touch with a man who shamelessly stabbed you in the back? The look in her eyes indicated that she did not foresee the consequences of her actions and was not ready for confrontation. Several tense seconds passed as we both struggled to cope with the weight of our severed bond. There were clear signs of defeat on her face as I watched her with a heavy gaze. She stumbled into the bedroom and, throwing off her clothes, collapsed on the bed. Silent tears flowed down her cheeks, each drop testifying to her suffering. She said something, but the words were lost in the air. I exclaimed desperately, trying to figure it out. She repeated it a little louder this time. "I'm really sorry," she confessed, a note of remorse in her voice. I acted stupidly. Please don't despise me. I calmed her down, my voice filled with familiar notes. You know me, Martha. I may not love you for a while, but I promise I won't hate you. But I'm not sure I can stand your presence. When I started to close the door, a wave of anger rose in me, forcing me to cause her even more pain. Let's do this quickly, I said firmly, wishing that her departure would happen without delay. As soon as you receive the divorce papers, please sign them immediately, and we can finally end our relationship. With these words, I closed the door, finally saying goodbye to Martha before the upcoming court hearing. The echoes of her sobs rang in my ears for a long time after I left. The next day, I picked up my spy equipment from Mueller's apartment, preparing for my next destination, my lawyer's office. He assured me that the divorce papers would be delivered within 2 days, as my demands were simple. Believing his words, I paid him in advance and left. When I tried to get back to work, I soon realized that it was a useless activity. In the end, I told my superiors about my predicament, and they advised me to take a few days off. On my way home, I noticed Martha busy moving and decided to park the car further down the street. While watching the video, I noticed Steve Mueller helping her. An irresistible desire flared up in me to engage in a fierce battle with him. With an extra 3 inches of height and 40 pounds of weight, it seemed impossible for me to stand up to him. So, I made the difficult decision to leave. When darkness fell, the true weight of Martha's betrayal finally hit me. At that moment, my anger dissipated, leaving behind an overwhelming feeling of loneliness that I had never experienced before. The divorce itself would have been even more painful if our children had still stayed with us. Although their absence was a blessing in disguise, it also became a curse, since I had no one to seek solace from. Unfortunately, my parents passed away, and my brother and sister lived on the other side of the country. I decided to contact my 2 daughters, and to my amazement, found that Martha had made no effort to contact them. During her student years, she often called and wrote to them, so I was surprised that it was easier for her to deceive me than her own children. A few weeks ago, if I had been asked what was the right thing to do with a spouse who had cheated, I would have advised prudence, harmony, and honor. The 23 years of dedication she showed as a mother and wife. But now, I am in a state of suffering, desperate for love, or maybe just looking for sympathy. I confided in my 2 daughters, Mandy and Tess, pouring out my heart to them. I was comforted that they did not doubt my words when I told them that their mother had betrayed me and abandoned our family for another man. Although I had a fleeting thought that they already knew about her act, their sincere concern convinced me otherwise. My attempts to hold back tears only further convinced them of the truth of what was happening. Their sympathy and support were a source of great comfort to me during that difficult time. I didn't understand much, but soon I will have to realize the scale of my mistake on that fateful day. After I finished calling the kids, I realized that I had already drunk a whole bottle of wine. Although I don't usually drink a lot, Martha and I usually share 1 or 2 bottles of wine a week, or sometimes drink 6 bottles of beer. It wasn't the alcohol itself, but the self-pity it caused. When a person is faced with failure, it is extremely important for him to take responsibility for his actions. But despite all my efforts, I could not understand what I had done to Martha. My work has never interfered with my family life. As for retraining, I rarely had to go on business trips, maybe once every 5 years or so. My overtime work was limited to only a few specific periods per year. Of course, since I turned 50, I could afford to relax a little, but I wasn't necessarily overweight or in poor physical shape. Mueller didn't look much younger or in better physical shape than me. I couldn't help but wonder if he had succeeded in romance, a field in which my knowledge was very limited. Before meeting Martha, I had only 4 girls, whose ages ranged from 18 to 28 years old. Martha and I had a lot to learn about each other after our meeting. I don't think Martha left me because of my position in society. His apartment looked quite ordinary, and the furniture was the most remarkable. Most likely, we were on the same financial level. As I lay in bed curled up in the fetal position for the night, it dawned on me that there was no reasonable explanation for her leaving other than that I had simply accepted my true self. Can a person really cope with the task of being himself? Can I cease to exist so that everything is resolved? The next morning, my phone rang at about 10 o'clock. Without checking the caller ID, I answered the call. "You're a despicable person," Martha screamed. "You shouldn't have been so rude to Mandy and Tess." Instinctively, I decided to hang up, but some part of me wanted to figure out the situation and put this terrible ordeal behind me. "What exactly do you consider rude, dear?" I asked. "Is it your month-long infidelity or the fact that you moved in with your lover, or maybe both?" There was only silence in response. "Silence is something I despise, Martha," I continued. "There's a part of me that still loves you," I confessed. "I can't tell if it's my feminine side, my masculine side, or just plain stupidity. However, I have sworn never to deceive our family." She begged desperately, "Please, you wouldn't dare, not Dad." I said emphatically, "Let's see," after which I abruptly ended the conversation. I hesitated, wondering if I should dial Martha's father's number on speed dial, but in the end, I refrained. Harvey suffered a lot after his wife died of breast cancer 2 years ago. He was a truly amazing man. At the age of 80, his physical condition was somewhat fragile. It seemed that his desire to live on was weakening, and now I could sympathize with this mood. Besides, he was a truly decent man. Instead of letting his existence be cut short by his daughter's actions, I should have given him the opportunity to quietly pass away. The anger in me subsided, and I decided to inform Martha of my decision. I took out Muller's phone bill and dialed the number indicated. After a short pause, a man's voice answered me. Without thinking twice, I asked if Martha McKay was available. There was a short pause on the air, accompanied by faint sobs in the background, in which Martha was unmistakably guessed. Muller asked, "Who's on the line?" Rage surged up in me, and I grumbled, "That's her father, you despicable man." Filled with indignation, I added, "And don't you dare talk to her. And anyway, tell my daughter never to contact me again, erase me from your memory, and leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and myself alone. Goodbye, pathetic person." Regret bubbled up in me, and less than a minute later, I dialed Martha's cell phone number. She answered almost instantly but remained silent. Tears continued to make her speech hesitant. "Hi, Martha," I said, trying to break the silence. "Did you have a good day?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of confusion and pain. "Frank, why?" she begged. "Why did you tell my father? It could have devastated him. His health has deteriorated recently, and you knew about it." Anger boiled up in me, and it was difficult for me to inflict such an insult. "Hey, don't shift the blame," I growled. "It wasn't your father talking to your lover on the phone, it was me. I have great affection for your father, and I understand that your infidelity would devastate him. I need to emphasize this point. Are you listening to me?" "Yes," she replied. "I'm listening. Understand that under no circumstances should this person interfere in my relationship with my daughters. Otherwise, your father will be fully informed of your actions. Don't think I'm joking. I've relied on your trust for most of my adult life. I never thought this was possible, but you've destroyed that trust. I repeat myself, although I can hardly restrain myself from taking immediate action against you at the moment. The only thing that defines me is the immense anger and resentment that I feel towards you. Can you comprehend the full depth of this?" Through broken sobs, she managed to say, "Yes," in a trembling voice. She continued, "I am truly sorry about all this. I never wanted any of this to happen." "Me too," I replied, without saying another word. I abruptly ended the conversation. 6 months later, official documents arrived signifying the official termination of our marriage. Although I had overcome my struggle with depression, there was a void in my life that I could not identify in any way. I went on several dates with women, but my success was very limited. They seemed to see right through me and my considerable emotional baggage. I once had a brief meeting with a colleague who, like me, was divorced, but this intimate experience seemed empty and devoid of genuine love and affection. We were just two people desperately seeking solace, but I felt even more alone than before. One evening, as I was returning home from work, a sudden realization dawned on me. It was after we sold our house and divided the proceeds that I finally saw the light. Settling into a new apartment, looking out the door, I greeted a new acquaintance who arrived just 2 weeks ago. "Hi, Jack," I said warmly, remembering my bachelor days when I gave names to the dusty masses that had accumulated in my house, especially those that hid behind doors and under the bed. When Jack was standing at the front door, the dust snuggled under the bed. Feeling awkward, I thought about getting a vacuum cleaner out of the closet, realizing that Mueller would never have allowed his apartment to reach such a neglected state. Some ashes in the toilet and a working ceiling fan, I picked up another porcelain trinket, smashed it, and threw it in the trash. I grabbed a rare bottle of wine from the shelf, chose the one with the most dust on it, opened it, poured it down the drain, and left the empty one in the trash. It was my grand finale. In the evening, the phone rang. It was my youngest, Tess. "Daddy, Daddy, you have to do something," she screamed. "Anything for you, sweetheart," I replied. "Help, Mom," Tess pleaded in a trembling voice, fighting back tears. She ended up at the police station after being hit by the man she lived with. She had nowhere else to turn, and she's decided never to return to this terrible place. The man became more and more violent, causing her great suffering. Trying to find solace, I intervened, urging her to hold on and assuring her that I was not the person who could help her mother. My deep-rooted hatred of her mother was undeniable, and I couldn't help but feel perverse satisfaction watching her current plight, caused not by abuse but by the collapse of her relationship with her lover. Confused and desperate for answers, Tess begged me, her voice full of desperation, "Daddy, please, my mother needs help." I reluctantly agreed to help but said, "Please know that I will only pick her up and provide transportation." "Thanks, Dad." Soon, I arrived at the police station. Unfortunately, she was still being interrogated, so I had to wait a while. But I sent her a message so she would know that I was waiting. I must admit that an hour later, my heart skipped a beat when I saw that Martha had a bruise under her left eye. When she saw me, she burst into tears. When I saw her approaching with her arms outstretched, I tensed internally but eventually stretched out my arms to keep her at a distance. "Hey, I'm only here because my daughter asked me to," I said firmly. "Don't think that we will become friends. I'll take you wherever you want, that's all." As I left the police station, I resisted the urge to look back and see if she was following me. The sound of her sobbing was the only sign that she was near. Once in the car, I asked, "Where would you like to go?" Her answer was simple, "Home." Silently, I steered the car towards the intended target. Martha was silent until I turned onto Mueller Street and parked in front of the house. Fighting back tears, she finally spoke, expressing her reluctance. "I don't want to go there," she said, her voice trembling. "Listen, Mueller is currently in custody. It gives you a full opportunity to pack your things and leave," I replied calmly. After a few moments of intense eye contact, she got out of the car and headed for the house. She quickly began pulling out trash bags with her meager collection of clothes. Considering how few things she left behind when she left me, her task was completed with amazing speed. Having completed her task, we set off on our way. Soon after, she asked, "Where are we going?" and there was fear in her voice. "We're on our way to your father's," I informed her. "You said you wanted to go home, but this is your only home." We drove in silence for several minutes. Her father lived in a distant suburb. Breaking the silence, Martha expressed regret. "I didn't have a chance to apologize to you. I regret my stupid actions and the fact that I was caught cheating. I accept the consequences, but my love for you has never waned." She just faded out of my mind for a moment. Living with Steve wasn't what I really wanted because we weren't compatible. "I am deeply sorry for the pain I have caused you, and I apologize." I was silent because there seemed to be no words that could adequately express my feelings. Could I reassure her that everything was fine? Absolutely not. Could I forgive her? It wouldn't be fair because I still held a grudge against her for the damage done to our marriage. That's why I kept silent. My silence hurt her more than any arrogant speech could convey the depth of my resentment. I continued to puzzle over how it was possible to confess my love to another and inflict such deep wounds on him. As we stood outside her father's house, Martha looked up at me seeking advice. "What should I tell my father?" "What is it?" she asked, leaving me in complete silence, completely dumbfounded. I couldn't help but exclaim, "Seriously? We've been divorced for months, and you still haven't informed your father? You've got to be kidding." Martha confessed. I just informed him that we are facing some difficulties. I replied, you're definitely in trouble now. I warned her to come up with a good reason that would not incriminate me because I did not want to face the consequences of her action. Besides, it was already late, and I refrained from offering Martha help in moving her things to her father's house. For first of all, I must admit that I felt a slight satisfaction watching her distress. Secondly, I had no desire to engage in conversation with Harvey. The next day, I parked the car on the opposite side of the street from Muller's house, patiently waiting for his return, which happened shortly before noon. It was time to put an end to their flirting once and for all. I quickly grabbed the most affordable Chilean wine I had purchased during the trip, spending only $10, and went up the stairs. When Muller opened the door, he was struck by my familiar face. Hello, I greeted him. Although we've never crossed paths, I'm Frank McKay, Martha Sharp's ex-husband. Handing him a bottle of wine, I urged him to accept it. Please take it so that you understand that I'm not a freeloader. This will serve as a substitute for the previous bottle of wine that I drank, I explained. After that, I reached into my pocket and took out the key, the one from his apartment. By handing it over, I made it clear that I no longer needed it. Martha left last night, and I couldn't help but smile as I headed for the car. My mood was high, and I knew perfectly well that Mueller would mourn the disappearance of his expensive bottle of Chateau Monalia, which was worth $900, more than the absence of Martha. Walking lightly and carelessly, I realized that revenge can bring a pleasant sweetness. I guess now I can finally move forward, leaving the ashes of that liar behind. For a long time, Martha called me and asked for forgiveness and to give her a chance to return everything. I felt pleasure from her suffering. Finally, she realized that no one else needed her except me, and she would meet her old age alone. And 3 months later, I met a very kind and wonderful woman whom I sincerely loved and appreciated. Story 2. 15 years ago, Amy and I exchanged vows, marking the beginning of our marriage path. Our love story began 3 years earlier, in Amy's sophomore year at college. I am Mark Butler, a happy man who met Amy at a bright party, instantly forming an indissoluble bond that influenced our lives. Our hearts remained intertwined until my graduation 2 years later. However, during Amy's senior year, we had to temporarily break up, but this setback only strengthened our resolve to be together forever, and we diligently planned our upcoming union. It took about 6 months after our wedding before we found ourselves in a lively meeting with other couples our age. This joyful event took the form of a delicious barbecue with searing grilled steaks and an abundance of refreshing drinks. When the evening came to an end, there were only 3 couples left gathered around a crackling fireplace, having a casual conversation and sipping drinks. Eventually, the topic of celebrity lounge passes came up, and I was intrigued and slightly puzzled. What exactly is a celebrity lounge pass? I asked. To my left, Sadie, a petite blonde, broke into the conversation to give an explanation. Getting into the celebrity lounge is very simple, she explained. This is a game in which you choose a candidate for whom you would temporarily postpone your marital vows. In fact, this is a celebrity with whom you will be allowed to have an intimate relationship. I couldn't help but wonder if they were playing this game for fun. Sadie gently patted her husband's leg, replying, "Yes and no, dear." She explained that this is really a game they are involved in, but stressed that her husband Tom and she, by mutual consent, provided each other with one opportunity to explore a relationship beyond them without the obligatory condition that it be with a celebrity. This revelation stunned me. Really? I exclaimed, unable to believe what I had just heard. Tom met my gaze with a grin and confidently confirmed, "Absolutely, my friend." He gestured at the other 2 couples in the room, indicating that they had made the same agreement. "We all came to this agreement on the same night," he added. "Katie, did you use your gym pass?" Katie looked away. "Tom, there's no need to tell everyone about this," she muttered. "Yes, I attended a conference where I helped a grieving man whose wife tragically died in a car accident. I informed Carl that I intend to use my pass to support him." Amy didn't say anything, but she came closer and took my hand. Carl calmly replied, "Yes, I don't mind." She returned to my house, and I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever have the opportunity to take advantage of my own freedom. the other couples resumed our celebrity selection game. After Amy named hers, she suggested that I choose someone. Time passed, and I hardly remembered our choice, but the strong passion that we shared that night remained in my memory. In the midst of our intimacy, Amy admitted that she had imagined how she would be with a desirable lover. But the next morning, I made it clear that I would never allow the thought of such a possibility. Amy and I both admitted that the whole thing was nothing more than a game. The details of that fateful night gradually disappeared from my memories. Life went on as usual. Amy and I quickly started building a family, and we had a son and a daughter. Sadie and Tom remained a part of our lives for a while, but over time we lost touch with them after their divorce a few years ago. Fate intervened, and I unexpectedly ran into Tom in one of the local bars. By pure chance, I came in after work and found him sitting alone, drowning his sorrows in alcohol. While we were having drinks, he confessed to me that he and Sadie had not only broken up but also something else. 2 other couples who attended the same barbecue ended up getting divorced. The reason for both breakups was the concept of a pass ticket. Tom explained that each couple naively believed that by getting a hall pass they would bring revival to their lives outside of marriage, and this would not affect their relationship in any way. Tom admitted that they couldn't be more wrong. As soon as the hall pass was used, comparisons and doubts began. These suspicions eventually gave rise to disrespect, which led to the breakup of their marriages. After talking to Tom, I realized that my initial impression of the hall pass game at the party was correct. It may be a pleasant fantasy, but it does not correspond to reality. I was going to share this revelation with Amy, but due to our hectic schedules, I couldn't do it. Now that I think about it, I wish I had. The incident occurred on Thursday evening when Amy was at a conference in Los Angeles. I got a call from her around midnight, and judging by the background noise, she was at a club. Her slurred speech indicated that she had been drinking. I want to tell you an incredible story. I happened to meet Joshua, a character from my favorite soap opera. He showed interest in me, and I decided to use my hall pass, she said amidst the commotion around her. What did you say? Are you really going to use your hall pass? I asked, slightly shocked. That's right, dear. I know you'll be okay with this. Bye, I'll see you on Saturday, she said abruptly, ending the call. I was confused about how she could even tell me that. What are you even talking about? I tried desperately to reconnect with her, calling her repeatedly, but her phone immediately went to voicemail. In alarm, I left several messages begging her not to make rash decisions, discussing the possible consequences of breaking our wedding vows, but I didn't get any response from Amy all night. I made several attempts to contact her in the morning, but unfortunately, all my efforts were in vain. It was an agonizing Friday filled with uncertainty about my wife's situation in Los Angeles. After finishing work, I took the children to their grandparents' house and then went to Jack's house. Jenny, Jack's wife, accompanied Amy on the same trip as they were colleagues and close friends. When I walked up to Jack's front door, his face showed surprise at the sight of me. It's hard for me to reach Amy on the phone. When she called me last night, her voice seemed unusual to me. Could you contact Jenny to see if she has any information? I asked Jack. Of course, Mark. I'll call Jenny and let her know that you're asking about Amy, but I'm not going to tell her that you're here because I'm afraid Amy might ask Jenny to provide her with an alibi. Instead, I'll talk to Jenny and casually mention Amy, which will allow you to eavesdrop without her knowledge, Jack replied. No problem, my friend. While Jack was taking out his phone, I turned on the recording function on my own. After the first call, his wife answered, "Hello, dear. You must have some kind of psychic ability. I just returned to my room after attending classes. We have dinner scheduled today, and we'll see you tomorrow." They talked about the conference for a while until Jack brought up the subject of Amy. Do you spend a lot of time with Amy? Mark called me and left a message asking if we had discussed her. Please don't say what we said. The last time I saw her was only last night while we were enjoying drinks. A popular TV series star suddenly came up to our table. Amy managed to get his autograph and even danced a few dances with him. When we were sitting at the table, Amy casually mentioned that she and Mark had agreed on admission to the hall. Seizing this opportunity, the TV series star readily volunteered to become Amy's companion. Worried, I tried to dissuade her, but she insisted that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In silence, Amy confessed to me that she was ready to have a physical relationship with someone. Before I knew it, she was already walking hand in hand with a man, leaving the club. I haven't seen her since that moment. "Oh, please don't tell Mark about this," Jack ended the call, looking at me apologetically. "Hey, brother, do you and your wife have an agreement on a hall pass?" Jack asked, not knowing. I answered, "I don't know, but it won't do any good." Feeling anxious, I stopped by my parents on the way home and asked my mother to look after the children for the next weekend. She felt that something was wrong, but I didn't tell her about the nature of this information. After returning home, I repeatedly tried to contact Amy by phone and SMS, but unfortunately, my efforts were in vain. I assumed that she had deliberately turned off her phone so as not to interfere with her communication with the celebrity from the soap opera. Amy's scheduled flight was supposed to get her back by mid-afternoon. Since she was in charge of Jenny's delivery, I asked Jack to text me when Amy completed the task. In preparation for our meeting, I placed a video camera on a shelf in the living room to capture our interaction on film. I wanted to document everything she would say. At about 4 o'clock, I received a text message from Jack, and I had about 20 minutes left to prepare. I hurriedly took out the remote control from the camera and anxiously waited for my wife to return. When the garage door rattled, I felt a surge of anticipation that made me almost jump out of my seat. Trying to stay calm, I pressed the record button on the remote. Suddenly, Amy appeared from the kitchen, clutching her bag tightly in her hands. "My God, what an exciting sight," she exclaimed excitedly. "I can only imagine," I replied, trying to suppress my own curiosity. "I've been desperately trying to reach you." Unfortunately, my phone suffered a terrible fate. It slipped out of my hands and broke on impact. The last time we talked, the sound quality was poor, so it was hard to hear you. As far as I understand, you had the opportunity to meet with the star of the series using your pass at the club. Joshua Morrow, who is a prominent figure in the series I'm watching, came up to our table. We danced together several times and discussed our agreement regarding admission to the hall. It's worth noting that he is incredibly attractive. Surprisingly, he expressed a desire for me to use my pass to the gym with him. I couldn't believe it, considering that he has a lot of attractive actresses. Afterwards, he invited me to his house, and I'll spare you the details. No, let me hear how he got my wife along with his actor buddy who had hundreds of other women. Amy hadn't felt my anger yet. Oh, yes, he was experienced. He knew how to give a woman physical pleasure. He claimed to have taken one of these pills. It upset me, but I knew I had to try. He lasted an impressively long time. Damn it, he was skilled. The rumors that these celebrities are exceptional in bed turned out to be true. Amy continued her story, feeling dizzy. It was only when she noticed the fury on my face that she asked if I was okay. "No, it's not okay," I replied. In the living room, my wife confesses to me of cheating. Her excitement is palpable when she talks about her intimate encounters with another man. Surprised and offended, I ask a question about her action, asking how she could commit such a betrayal. Embarrassed, she replied that it was a unique and rare opportunity that she couldn't resist. She explained that Joshua was her pass to the gym and suggested that I would be thrilled that she was able to fulfill a long-held dream. But I can hardly find happiness in a situation where our sacred wedding vows have been violated. I expressed my concern, stressing the importance of loyalty in our relationship. In her defense, she said she was just using her day off to indulge in fantasies, just like our friends did. She believed that by using her hall pass, she did not violate our marriage vows. Concern flashed across Amy's face. "No, dear, it was just a game," and I said bluntly. "That's a game," she reassured me. "I promise to always honor our marriage vows and will not tolerate any violations on your part. If you had the opportunity to be with a celebrity, I would support you with all my heart. I don't understand why you can't just be happy for me knowing that I've had an unforgettable experience. Rest assured, I won't forget it either, and I'm sure the family you seem to have forgotten won't forget either." I walked over to Amy and held out my hand to her. When I carefully removed the wedding ring from her finger, I was overwhelmed by a wave of mixed emotions. "Did you really have an intimate relationship with him without removing our symbol of love and devotion to each other?" I asked, disbelief in my voice. Amy's answer startled me. No, it wasn't an act of love. It was just intimacy, she clarified. Her tone did not have the emotional connection that we once shared. Yes, I didn't take it off, she admitted with a slight doubt. I was going to, but Joshua insisted that I keep it on. I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger and betrayal. Of course, he insisted, I replied, bitterness in my voice. He wanted to mock our marriage by using your loyalty to me against us. He deliberately took advantage of the fact that you were a married woman. Amy stood defiantly with her hand on her hip, as if challenging me to understand her point of view. There was a furious expression on her face that caught my attention. I don't understand why you're making a big deal out of a molehill. It only happened for 2 nights. What, maybe I need to make some kind of compensation to calm you down? I appreciate your offer, but I will decline. May I ask if the soap boy didn't use protection? Well, no. Amy was already angry, but now my question made her embarrassed. You allowed a man who had unprotected sexual intercourse with over 100 women, and maybe even some men, because of his status as a TV star, to do the same to you. I can't help but wonder what kind of illness he passed on to you. Under the influence of Hollywood, it's pretty weird. If you weren't taking birth control pills, he probably gave you something else. Did you really take the pills? No, you know I didn't have to. This is unbelievable, I exclaimed again. Just imagine, you could be pregnant with a celebrity's child. Amy's thoughts were clearly racing in her head. No, my period started last week, so I'm protected for the rest of this week. It's funny that you're only thinking about it now. I'm tired of these conversations. Where are the children? They're with my parents. I prefer to keep them away while we discuss our breakup. What do you mean by divorce? Are you seriously thinking of divorcing me because of this? No, divorce is not discussed, I kept calm, looking straight into Amy's eyes. You've made your decision, and now it's time for me to make mine. This is absurd. Are you really going to leave our family because of this? This is not such a big problem, and you will have to put up with it. Amy shouted. After our conversation came to an end, I silently climbed the stairs to the guest bedroom, taking care to close the door behind me. Amy had been banging on the door for what seemed like forever, insisting that we needed to talk, but I preferred to answer only in silence. In the morning, before Amy woke up, I left the house early. When I arrived at my parents' house, I found that my father had already woken up, and the others were still asleep. Over a steaming cup of coffee, I poured out my soul to my father, telling him the whole story. Throughout my story, Dad listened attentively without saying a word, patiently absorbing every detail. When I finally finished the story, he just looked at me, and his expression was filled with contemplation. What a difficult situation, Dad. May I ask your opinion on what I should do? Son, it's important to remember that times have changed, and it seems that such behavior is more acceptable now. If your mother had done the same thing as your wife, I would have been very angry. But sometimes we have to make difficult decisions. Dad, I'm not sure I can survive this. She knew how strongly I felt about infidelity, and I believed that she shared the same values. What about the prenuptial agreement that her mother forced us to sign? Amy told me that her mother repeatedly caught her father cheating and that her mother wanted to protect Amy from pain. But Amy seems to have forgotten all about it. My father found it funny and predicted that I would remind her of it. I agreed but decided to wait and observe her actions first. Amy continued to downplay the situation, insisting that nothing terrible had happened and that I needed to come to my senses. Dad, I truly believe that she has no remorse for her actions and sees nothing wrong with them. It wasn't until after 10 p.m. that my phone started buzzing continuously with calls and messages from Amy. My curiosity was aroused when she asked about my whereabouts. When she didn't get an answer from me, she turned to the children. Our daughter Julie came into the kitchen, clearly tired, and yawned. Daddy, Mom is wondering where you are and why you ignore her calls, she said. In search of further clarification, I asked, Honey, what did she tell you? I wonder what Julie said. It's funny, but that's exactly what she asked me. She wants to know what you've told us. I was confused by this situation. What could be going on between the two of you? Is this infidelity on your part or hers? Startled, I muttered to myself. Damn it, she's perceptive. Wait a minute, Mom cheated on you, didn't she? I think it would be better if you ask your mother this question. I didn't want to be accused of organizing a feud between you. I knew Julie would be very upset about her mother. Julie, as befits a stubborn teenager, took out her mobile phone and turned on the speakerphone. Dad is here. Did you have an affair, Julie? What do you mean? Whatever he said, it's not true. What did your father tell you, Amy? He didn't tell you anything, Mom. I can see it in his expression. You had an affair, didn't you? No, it wasn't. And even if he claims that he was, that's not true, I muttered, watching the mother's confused look. I couldn't help but be skeptical. Julie tapped on the phone screen and sighed. I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't believe Mom would do this to you. If she cheated on you, I can understand that you want a divorce. You've always stressed the importance of honesty and morality. I don't blame you. Julie turned to me, a grim expression on her face, and silently climbed the stairs. Your child is wise beyond his years. He has approached this situation maturely, Dad reassured me, feeling unsure. I replied, I'm not sure if I'll continue to be a father. It took half an hour before there was an unexpected strong knock on the front door. Startled, I strained my ears to catch snatches of the conversation unfolding outside. Amy, I'm sorry, but you can't come to our house today, my father's voice said. Mr. Butler, I do not know what your son told you, but it's all fiction. I'm innocent, Amy pleaded desperately. My father repeated adamantly, no matter what you say, Amy, you're not welcome here. Angry, Amy flared up, tell him I'm innocent. If he claims otherwise, he will face consequences. There was anger in her words. Turning to my father as he re-entered the kitchen, I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Careful, son. I noticed that expression. She won't give up without a fight. This lady is as stubborn as a cornered cat. She will lie and scratch to escape. I pray that you have evidence that will expose her actions. When the children and I returned home after lunch, Amy was still silent. I spent another night in the guest room, undisturbed by any knocks on the door. The kids had already left for school, and I was sitting at the kitchen table leisurely sipping coffee. I decided it was the right moment to finally meet Amy in person. When she entered the kitchen, she looked indifferent and unaffected by everything that was happening. I asked how the children had rested, and she poured herself a cup of coffee. Worried, I asked why I found her sleeping in the guest room and if she was feeling well. In response, she was confused and asked why I called her a cheating wife. In response, I told her about the alleged affair with the star of the show, which allegedly took place while I was away from home last week. Amy tried to deny her knowledge of my accusations, expressing confusion and uncertainty about my intentions. I won't let you ruin my reputation with unfounded accusations. You're clearly grasping at straws, but mark my words, I'm not going to let this go by. Consider this a warning, a declaration of war. But if you are ready to bury the hatchet and restore our former relationship, the choice is yours. I am ready to forget about these false accusations. Unfortunately, I can't forget about your past actions. You've hurt me, and I won't hesitate to defend myself. I defend my innocence, and most importantly, I will not allow you to further defame my name. It is impossible to prove my involvement in any offenses. If you try to blame me, you'll end up regretting it. It's time to move forward and focus on our marriage. The seriousness of the threat became obvious when I heard it, but I chose to remain silent. I just headed to my car, pretending to be on my way to work. I drove patiently down the street, waiting for Amy to leave for the position of deputy principal at her school. As soon as she left, I quickly returned home. Taking Amy's words seriously, I began combing the house for any clues. If this situation was really a battle, then I was trying to gather as much information and ammunition as possible. During our conversation, Jenny mentioned that Amy had managed to get the soap boy's autograph. It made me wonder if she was going to deny her involvement in any affair. Getting such a valuable item seemed like something she wouldn't give up so easily. I suspected that she would hide it somewhere. It took me 2 hours of diligent searching, but eventually, I came across it. Amy hid the old briefcase in the back of the closet, locking it securely. But knowing her tendency to use the same code for all briefcases, I managed to unlock it. Under several folders, I found a photo, a typical commercial shot of a soap boy. I looked at the photo I was holding in my hands. It had a modest inscription addressed to my friend Amy, Joshua Morrow. Turning the photo over, I found another inscription praising Joshua. "You were great." Putting the photo aside, I got ready for the next item on my agenda, the lawyer's office. Before I went there, I made sure to get copies of the scanned marriage contract, a recorded conversation with Amy's friend, and an audio confession in which Amy admits she was wrong. I saved all the evidence on 2 portable flash drives. The lawyer I was going to contact had a reputation for relentlessly seeking justice when it came to unfaithful partners and spouses. In the field of divorce cases, she was highly appreciated for her confidence and determination. Vicki Sampson had earned a reputation as a very formidable person. While I was talking about the events Amy was involved in and what I wanted to do, Vicki just leaned back in her chair and smiled. I admired her reaction, recognizing her steadfast character. We will strategically set up a trap to eliminate the possibility of retreat. It may be inconvenient, but we need to gather evidence before anyone will believe our statements. Let Amy believe that she has the advantage until the last moments. Mrs. Sampson reached out and shook my hand in agreement. I will arrange the necessary documents and provide her with service at school, but there are a few things I need you to take care of first. Look at the credit card statements to identify the club where she met her soap star. Secondly, get access to her iCloud account because her selfies with Joshua can be stored there. Most likely, she deleted all compromising materials from her phone and saved them in a safe place, possibly on her cloud. Wasting no time, I hurried home and immediately sat down at her computer. Surprisingly, it was not difficult to get access to her iCloud account. In her collection of photographs, I came across exactly the trio of pictures I was looking for. 2 showed the moments between Amy and the soap boy, and the third showed the delightful union of Amy, the soap boy, and her friend Jenny. I quickly transferred these images to a portable flash drive, wanting to take a closer look at them. Upon closer inspection, my eyes caught the name of the club unmistakably scrolled on the wall as a background. This discovery brought great satisfaction to my lawyer, who strongly advised me to keep this revelation a secret, not revealing it to anyone, and under no circumstances having thought out a strategy. She intended to give Amy these important photos at her school on Friday afternoon, in order to have some free time with the children. I planned to take them to my parents for the weekend. She also advised me not to leave the house, no matter what Amy said or did that Friday. When I was taking the children to their parents, my phone started ringing. I turned it off by calling voicemail and deliberately ignored her messages. Shortly after arriving home, she suddenly burst into the house. Sitting in the living room, I turned on the video camera when I heard the garage door bang. I wanted to capture any incriminating statements. "You are a despicable person," she exclaimed angrily. "What are you doing?" I started to answer, but she interrupted me. "You just couldn't move on, could you? What's the matter, Mark? Is your fragile male ego hurt? You embarrassed me in front of my colleagues, and now you want a divorce? Okay, I'll agree, but you'll pay the price. Deep down, you know that you can't prove the infidelity you claim in the divorce, and without that, I'll take everything that belongs to you. I hope you're happy. You could just forget about it. Didn't it bother you that I had an amazing meeting with a famous person? You could let me enjoy myself, but no. Well, to hell with you." While Amy was angrily pacing the room, I was silent, watching her every move. After a while, she returned, turned to the living room with fierce determination in her eyes. "When are you going to leave?" I replied calmly, "I'm not going anywhere. I plan to stay here." Amy's expression remained unwavering as she replied, "No, you can't stay. If you want to get divorced, you have to find a new place." She stared at me, waiting for a reaction that never came. Instead, I just sat there, smiling faintly. "Well," she said, "when this ordeal is over, you'll regret that you didn't keep calm and let us move on." The next month passed under a sign of great tension as Amy and I remained completely silent. The children hesitated to approach Amy, feeling the tension in the air. Julie even began to doubt whether her mother was really unfaithful. It is noteworthy that Amy resorted to telling her version of events to anyone who would listen, claiming that I had fabricated the whole situation. To further complicate the situation, her lawyer, in response to our petition, demanded sanctions for false statements. Amy even tried to expel me from our shared home, but the court eventually rejected her request, recognizing the urgency of our case. The court expedited the hearings, giving both sides limited time to testify and interview witnesses. My lawyer started questioning Amy and her friend Jenny. Surprisingly, both of them strongly denied any connection between Amy and the star of the series, strongly denying a romantic relationship or a visit to the club. Realizing the importance of honesty during the upcoming testimony, my lawyer stressed that I should tell the truth but refrain from revealing further details. Hopefully, she wished that their lawyer would not ask about the evidence we had gathered of Amy's alleged infidelity, believing that we did not have solid evidence. As Mrs. Sampson predicted, my lawyer's fears were justified. She assured me that I had not seen any signs of deception on the part of my wife. But I did not ask for any evidence of her misconduct. Her lawyer didn't seem to know about Amy's actions, which I accused her of during the trial. Amy seemed confident that everything was going well. I testified about Amy's infidelity, expressing my emotions about the betrayal and stating my disagreement to be present in the hall. I was then questioned on the same issues during cross-examination. I did not attend her conference and did not witness how she interacts with other men. Amy stated under oath that she had done nothing wrong and, like me, was categorically against adultery, completely rejecting the idea of a hall pass. Thanks to the intervention of Amy's lawyer, Jenny was called to testify, confirming that the alleged meeting with the soap star never happened. While Jenny was testifying, I glanced at her husband Jack, who was present in the courtroom, and noticed how he lowered his head to avoid my gaze. Jenny felt awkward when my lawyer questioned her about Jack's phone call and that Amy had allegedly left with the star of the series. Increasingly nervous, she stubbornly stuck to her original version, denying any knowledge of the incident. When Jenny took her seat, Amy and her lawyer assumed a self-confident expression, confident in their position. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Amy's lawyer stood up to demand sanctions against us for our alleged false testimony. The judge, in turn, reprimanded my lawyer for failing to substantiate our allegations. Mrs. Sampson, smiling slightly, stood up and politely interrupted, addressing the judge, "We have indisputable evidence." My lawyer replied firmly, "I object." Amy's lawyer continued, "We have not been informed of this evidence, therefore, they are not obliged to disclose them. If their witnesses were truthful, there would be no need for counterarguments." The judge smiled and told Mrs. Sampson to continue. Mrs. Sampson called her investigator to testify. "Your Honor, before we proceed," she stated, "we acknowledge that Mrs. Butler did not engage in any sexual relationship with Joshua Merrow." I was completely stunned by what I had just heard, but Mrs. Sampson gave me a stern look, indicating that I should keep quiet and be patient. The lawyer then contacted her investigator, who testified that Joshua Merrow had been in Europe during that very week. Amy's lawyer quickly intervened, taking advantage of the opportunity. After it became clear that my client is innocent of adultery, we demand to stop this leapfrog and call on the court to impose a penalty on Mr. Butler. Mrs. Sampson couldn't contain her joy, as evidenced by the wide smile on her face. But she clarified, "No, we do not deny the accusations of adultery. We're just saying it wasn't with Joshua Merrow." After that, Jenny was called to the witness stand. My lawyer asked her again if she and Amy had been to the conference and if they had met with the man they thought was Joshua Merrow. Again, she strongly denied it. Jenny was also asked if she had contacted her husband and informed him that Amy had left with a man who was not her husband. Despite the reminder of the oath, Jenny stubbornly denied the existence of such a call. I glanced at her husband, who was speaking with a solemn expression on his face. Unfortunately, when the recording of the conversation with Jenny was turned on, my lawyer started playback, but Amy's lawyer quickly interrupted him, objecting to the recording being presented as evidence. Mrs. Sampson, who was standing next to me, claimed that Jenny had voluntarily invited me as a guest to her house, giving me permission to listen to the call. In response, the judge silenced the lawyer, telling him to directly ask Jenny a question about the authenticity of her voice in the recording. Having no other choice, Jenny reluctantly admitted that it was indeed her voice. At that moment, I felt a sense of vindication when I realized that the truth had finally been revealed. Amy was subsequently subpoenaed to testify. Amy once again refuted the claim that, upon returning from a trip, she confessed to having an intimate relationship with another man. She caught her breath when a video surfaced of her discussing her intimate encounter with Joshua Merrow. Overwhelmed with emotion, Amy burst into tears when incriminating selfies and a signed promotional photo were presented as evidence. When Amy finished speaking on the witness stand, the judge turned his attention to Mrs. Sampson. Mrs. Sampson immediately contacted her investigator, confidently stating, "Judge, we have strong evidence of Mrs. Butler's infidelity." Although it seems she was wrong about her accomplice. The investigator showed surveillance photos taken at the club, which showed that Amy was communicating with another person. Pointing to the pictures, Mrs. Simpson explained, "This gentleman is not Joshua Merrow. In fact, he has a reputation for stalking married women and cheating on them. In addition, he was found to have numerous sexually transmitted diseases." I couldn't help but look at Amy, noticing the shock on her face. After a short break, the judge resumed his seat and launched into a lengthy discussion about the virtues of honesty and loyalty. In the end, the judge declared that Amy had indeed committed adultery, as stated in the prenuptial agreement. Having made a decision in my favor, the judge confirmed the validity of the marriage contract. Moreover, he took the opportunity to discipline Amy, stressing that even in the absence of a prenuptial agreement, custody of the children would have been awarded to me. It is important to note this for the official protocol. Amy was considered an inadequate mother because she constantly tried to cheat. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she turned away from the lawyer's desk, preparing to leave. But then the judge intervened, ordering Mrs. Butler to stay put, as the trial was not yet completed. Jenny was asked to come to the bench and stand next to Amy. Both women raised their right hands, solemnly swearing to tell the truth in the courtroom, recognizing the sanctity of this oath in this building. The judge's gaze was directed directly at Jenny, and he stressed that any of her erroneous beliefs about helping her friend did not matter. Lying didn't matter in this courtroom. In a hypothetical scenario of a criminal case, both of you would currently be in custody. It has been established that you both gave false testimony. As a result of which, I am forced to find you in contempt of court. Therefore, the judge imposed a maximum fine of $5,000 on both of them. Unfortunately for Amy, her ill-fated day took an even sadder turn when she left the courthouse and unexpectedly ran into a local news crew who immediately pointed their camera in her direction. I later found out that their lawyer had warned them about a similar situation. Mrs. Butler, would you like to share your thoughts on the decision to leave the family for a short meeting with a fictional television personality? When the reporter asked his question, Amy reached her limit. Her reaction was instantaneous and intense. She let out a chilling scream and rushed at the reporter. The scene turned into a chaotic flurry of flailing limbs and kicking legs as Amy relentlessly attacked her target. After overpowering the reporter, Amy began pulling his hair until a deputy sheriff intervened and used a taser. The entire incident was captured on film by a cameraman, which ensured it was widely covered in the national news that evening. Unfortunately, Amy was unable to witness her infamous act as she ended up in the county jail, where she remained for the next 6 months. I didn't have a stunning blonde ready to replace Amy, no matter how much I wanted to. Being a single parent with 2 children took up most of my time and energy. Despite Amy's attempts, I decided not to resume our relationship when she got out of prison. Although my compassionate mother urged me to give her another chance, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Amy's downfall led to the loss of her career and made her the subject of ridicule throughout the city. After 3 months of persistent calls and texts from Amy, I finally agreed to meet her at her mother's house. In a moment of silence, I listened attentively as Amy poured out her heart, expressing great love and longing for me. She longed to be a part of our family again, but her arrest and subsequent conviction for assault limited her visits with the children to supervised sessions. Regretfully, Amy admitted that she had fabricated her affair. Feeling deeply humiliated for being the victim of a cheater, with tears in her eyes, she begged me for forgiveness, promising to become the embodiment of a devoted wife. Taking a deep breath, I got up from my seat, considering my next steps. Amy, your speech was filled with passion and conviction. It was obvious that every word you said sounded sincere. I appreciated your apology for lying, admitting that you miss our family, and expressing your love for me. I sincerely believed in your words. But what struck me the most was what you didn't mention. You have not admitted or repented that you violated our sacred wedding vows. It seems that the only thing you regret is that you couldn't continue a relationship with the person you wanted. I find it hard to believe that you really regret your actions or even consider them infidelity. I answer your question with a categorical no, and damn it, no, there will be no reconciliation between us now or in the future. I insist that you stop all communication with me immediately. Failure to comply with this requirement will result in the reinstatement of the restraining order that was issued at the time of your arrest. Amy got up from her seat, tears streaming down her face. I deeply regret my infidelity and apologize for enjoying it. Is this the confession you wanted? Amy, our relationship is over. You have to move on and live your own life because I have no chance of her being connected to me. I turned and walked out the door, with Amy yelling at me and her mother struggling to hold Amy back. Story 3. The sound of the doorbell wouldn't have bothered me so much if I hadn't just sat down with a beer to watch a football game. It was a rare Saturday when my wife and 3 daughters went shopping for prom dresses, giving me the luxury of uninterrupted sports viewing. I thought this special moment deserved my full attention. Reluctantly, I headed for the door, quietly hoping for a quick resolution of the problem and the speedy departure of the sellers of certain goods. I impatiently opened the door, but I was greeted by a sight that aggravated my already sour mood. You haven't converted to Mormonism, have you? The first words that came out of my mouth when I was carefully examining my ex-wife, whom I had not seen for almost 2 decades. It would be an understatement to say that Vivian was stunned and deeply embarrassed by my harsh remark. She stood with her mouth open while I looked at the luxury Mercedes parked outside the house and the large stone adorning her finger, a clear sign of her marriage to Dr. Jerry Spalding. Vivian seemed to have recovered a little from the initial shock as she hesitantly replied, "No, Thomas, I'm not a Mormon." And when we exchanged glances, her face showed obvious discomfort. I couldn't help but wonder why I asked such a discouraging question. I answered sincerely, knowing full well that my words could make the situation worse. Vivian's presence puzzled me, making me watch her closely, comparing her current one with the Vivian I had known for so long. Even at 44, Vivian remained an amazing person. Her once long blonde locks had turned into a fashionable shoulder-length hairstyle, and her figure had become more mature and similar to the young and mobile woman I fell in love with in my freshman year of college. Her mouth, once decorated with eternal wrinkles at the corners, had now dropped slightly, and a hint of sadness had appeared in her once captivating green eyes. But apart from these changes, she seemed like an aged reflection of my first love. There was a silent plea in her gaze as she plucked up the courage to speak on the topic she had set. "I'd like to talk to you about Benjamin," Vivian ventured, her eyes meeting mine. Her nervousness became apparent when she wiggled her thumbs, a gesture that showed how uncomfortable she was approaching me for this conversation. "Why on earth would I even think of discussing Benjamin with you after all these years?" I exclaimed in disbelief. Vivian quickly interjected, "He's still your son," as if desperately trying to make me believe her words, but at the same time, her eyes averted from mine, betraying a fleeting fear. I growled, feeling the insolence of her presence inflame my anger. I stuttered, saliva sprayed from my mouth, and anger overwhelmed me. It became clear that this meeting was a mistake. Vivian muttered to herself and looked away from me. Despite her reaction, I couldn't help but hear the familiar voice of my wife, Allison, ringing in my mind. It was she who saved me from a ruined existence, guiding me to a bright future where I could regain my self-esteem. She seemed to be by my side, giving me comfort and urging me to meet Vivian and put an end to this. Before Vivian could get off the porch, I plucked up the courage and called out to her. "Viv, please wait. We need to talk." When I gestured for her to enter, she glanced at me and walked through the open door. "Let's go inside and sit down," I suggested. Vivian hesitantly approached me and crossed the threshold, soaking up the atmosphere of a middle-class home in which 3 extraordinarily bright young women lived. After taking her to the kitchen, I started making coffee while she settled down at the table. "Will you have cream, no sugar?" I asked, multitasking while preparing drinks. After receiving a nod of confirmation, I quickly completed the task and handed her a mug with a steaming drink. I sat down opposite her and started a conversation, encouraging her to tell me what was going on. Vivian began cautiously, admitting that Ben had always been difficult to discipline, but his behavior had escalated significantly in recent years. Before she could continue, I interrupted her, wondering how I could find out about Ben's problems considering that she left when he was less than a year old. My concern for you and Ben has waned until this very moment, I said. Vivian seemed stunned by my revelation. I couldn't figure out the reason for this, but the struggle to keep in touch with Benjamin between my rich doctor boyfriend and me seemed insurmountable. All I wanted was to be aware of his life. Vivian noticed my expression and stopped, realizing that her attempt to intervene was futile. She made another attempt, stopping to apologize for the mishandling of our breakup. She stared nervously at her intertwined and motionless fingers. It was never my intention to harm you. Curiosity overwhelmed her as she looked up, watching my reaction to this unequivocal phrase. Whatever emotions showed on my face seemed to convince her to start all over again. Anyway, in recent years, Ben has been involved in a number of difficult situations, starting with theft, fighting, and ending with a passion for illegal drugs. She sighed heavily, as if mentally preparing for what she had to tell. Just 2 weeks ago, he got into a violent fight, as a result of which another person was severely beaten. When Ben turns 18, the authorities want to hold him accountable as an adult due to the presence of illegal drugs and firearms. Vivian, her eyes full of tears, turned to me for support. Jerry, without providing any legal assistance, completely abandoned Ben. He firmly believes that Ben should be in prison for all his actions without exception. Vivian's voice trailed off, and I kindly handed her a napkin to wipe her eyes. I understand that, given the events that have occurred, I have no right to make any requests to you, but the thought of him being in this terrible prison is unbearable to me. He's a really kind boy. I paused when Vivian slowed down and stopped, her breathing quickening as she tried to pull herself together, looking for my reaction. She looked up at me while I was taking a sip of coffee, looking out the window. I immersed myself in the soothing landscape of my backyard, thinking about how to respond to her. Vivian, do you remember the movie Trading Places? I asked, a note of thought in my voice. Vivian replied in confusion, You mean the movie starring Eddie Murphy? You made me watch it during our Christmas movie marathon. What does this have to do with our conversation? I raised my hand to stop her, acknowledging that the film is undoubtedly brilliant and carries a deep philosophical meaning. Since Vivian was visibly puzzled, I continued delving into the heated debate between Mortimer and Randolph Duke on the age-old question of nature and upbringing. They pondered whether success is determined by genetics or upbringing. To test this, they conducted a small experiment. Vivian was becoming more and more perplexed. I decided to turn the conversation to the main topic, billionaires. These people had the opportunity to conduct such experiments without much effort. Conversely, for an ordinary person like me, the idea of such experiments would be almost unattainable. But theoretically, under ideal conditions, an ordinary person like me could also think about this question. I can do my own experiment. Vivian's patience seemed to have completely run out, as evidenced by the last sip of coffee when she exclaimed, Thomas, what are you talking about? Feeling the tension, I decided it was best to avoid direct eye contact while I continued. Imagine an ordinary man madly in love with his wife and looking forward to the birth of their first child. And now imagine a terrible rumor that says something unimaginable about the very woman to whom he devoted the last 8 years of his life, having dedicated his life to her and idolized her. He had no idea that she was secretly involved with a doctor at her workplace. At these words, a heavy sigh escaped Vivian's lips. Perhaps this unfortunate man did not want to believe these rumors. He believed so much in his wife's decency and her love for him that he could not even think about these disgusting insinuations. But his denial was shattered when the wife of the aforementioned doctor presented him with irrefutable evidence, recordings and photographs that exposed his wife not only of deception but also of infidelity. But it turned out that the child she was expecting could be from her lover. Due to her lover's ongoing divorce proceedings, they could not get married at the moment. As a temporary solution, Vivian intended to present the child as her husband's child until they could be together. Even the doctor jokingly mentioned the possibility of receiving alimony. Seeing Vivian's shocked and devastated expression, I maintained eye contact and assured her that it was all purely hypothetical. Such terrible people simply do not exist in reality. Vivian began to cry softly, but I continued. Imagine this unhappy man who is faced with many options, but each of them does not suit him. This stupid man despises all the possibilities that open up before him. Every evening he returns to his seemingly affectionate wife and watches her growing belly with every passing day. And with every inch of his growing belly, his love for her decreases. With an icy heart, he looked at Vivian, looking for a reaction to his story, but she was still crying silently, her head resting on her hands on the table. And yet, in the midst of his torment, an exciting Christmas movie planted an idea in him. Instantly, his despair was shattered by a newfound sense of determination. From that moment on, he began his journey with unexpected assertiveness that amazed even himself. He may not have the intelligence of a hospital manager, but it's worth noting, Vivian, that he made great sacrifices by depriving himself of the opportunity to finance this woman's education. Although his intelligence is not comparable to that of an emergency room doctor, he still deserves praise. Let's imagine that he developed a close friendship with nurses and staff who specialized in childbirth, working in hospital nurseries, and even caring for newborns. He may even have attended Christmas parties at the hospital with his wife. He could have repeatedly bumped into them in childbirth classes and maybe even shared a cup of coffee with one of them, seeking support like an anxious expectant father. Vivian, being as astute a person as you are, does not need an explanation of how such a person, with the support of the doctor's vindictive wife, could take the opportunity to substantiate the well-known hypothesis about Mortimer and Randolph Duke. At that moment, Vivian began to understand the direction in which this narrative was moving. As already mentioned, her intelligence was obvious, and immediately her sobbing stopped, gradually subsiding. It was as if this outstanding seer had somehow hidden from his wife the excruciating pain she caused him every day. She tore apart all their cherished memories, craved his unwavering support, and at the same time plotted to drain him emotionally and financially to the point where only she and her despicable lover could find solace together. Let me emphasize once again, Vivian, that this is an exclusively artistic work. These monstrous characters were created solely to scare young children. Hardly any of us could imagine the existence of a man so devoid of compassion, so malicious that he would cause such pain to someone whom he said he cherished. Vivian intervened, a note of sadness in her voice. I believe that I loved you. I gave myself completely to him, but he didn't reciprocate. I stopped her again with a quick movement of my head. Hush, Vivian, you're spoiling the narrative, and I've just come to the climax. Now, our protagonist, driven by relentless scientific research, has finally brought all the elements into perfect alignment. He just needed to give an impetus to the development of events. Fortunately, his wife has completely lost interest in him, otherwise, she would have noticed the shadows that engulfed him from time to time, plunging him into a state of deep despair. Only his commitment to scientific responsibility helped him not to give up. Vivian's gaze reflected horror as I revealed the details of my story. Her hands were no longer shaking with excitement, and the tears on her face had stopped, replaced by an agonizing expectation that I would continue. Our main character was burdened with a lot of stress at that moment. Time was running out. As a result, being in the hospital for a joyful occasion, the husband anxiously awaits the appearance of his child, who is not a male representative despite his wife's desire that the sex of the child remain a surprise. He took the trouble to find out this information. There had been enough unexpected events in his life, and he craved certainty. Vivian, as someone who is well acquainted with the work of hospitals, you probably know that in those days, the security measures were not as strict as they are now. Our main character was almost shocked by how easily he managed everything to distract the attention of others. Our main character deftly organized a small party with comical gifts and mouth-watering cupcakes to congratulate everyone involved in the birth of a child. This allowed his reliable accomplice, who could have been the doctor's wife, burdened with her own infertility problems and offended that her unfaithful husband impregnated the woman he worked with, to take action unnoticed. As I continued to narrate, Vivian couldn't hide her discomfort at my words, but it only increased the anticipation that our hero must have felt. He was on the verge of conducting the Mortimer and Randolph experiment, but with a significant change. Instead of using the offspring of highly educated people, he intended to replace them with children of a 16-year-old girl addicted to illegal substances and her unstable friend who suffered from the same addiction. When the sound of a chair tipping over reached my ears, I realized that Vivian had fainted. Although I did not immediately rush to her aid, I eventually managed to put her back in place with a glass of cold water from the bedside table. Despite my uncertainty about the extent of Vivian's involvement, I could tell by her distant gaze and twitching cheek that she was present. It became clear to me that this story must be completed once and for all. As I said before, our main character has finally achieved his long-awaited goal. It was supposed to be a moment of great victory, and for a fleeting moment it was. But his joy was short-lived when he looked into the room and saw that his future ex-wife was recovering from a grueling 12-hour labor. A surge of affection and nostalgia swept over him, overwhelming his emotions. At that moment, he realized that he had reached his limit. He pondered a difficult question, reflecting on the consequences of depriving someone he deeply cherished of something so important. Just the thought of it became unbearable, forcing him to take immediate action and fix the situation. And now, Vivian, pay close attention to the following fragment because it is of great importance in this hypothetical narrative. Just when he was on the verge of completing his experiment, an unexpected event occurred that led him to fulfill his destined fate and marked the beginning of a chain of events that stretched over 18 years and ended at the present moment. Just as he was preparing to approach his wife and tell her about his achievements, a doctor dressed in medical attire entered through the next door, making Vivian visibly alarmed. Seeing how the doctor approached the woman lying on the bed and gently kissed her on the lips, the fate of the hero changed rapidly, bringing him back to a beggarly state while he watched his wife look at her lover with a sense of joy, witnessing the intimate moment of the birth of their child. I looked back at Vivian. Her eyes were tightly closed as if she was trying to figure out what was going on in her head at that very moment. Vivian, our main character, went through a profound transformation like a phoenix reborn from the remnants of its past. All the emotions it once harbored for its unfaithful spouse instantly disappeared in the raging flames. In that one moment, his unwavering loyalty to the Duke was strengthened, his path became infallible. Vivian met my horrified gaze, and with difficulty finding her voice, uttered a question that pierced through me. How could you expose me and our innocent child to such a cruel act? Her eyes demanded an explanation, and I tried to explain my reasons. Vivian, when we dive into the field of the genetic structure of a child, 3 possibilities open up before us: 100%, 50%, or the absence of our DNA. I wanted our child to have 100% of our genetic essence, while you wanted a 50% contribution from both sides. As a result, our DNA had no effect, amounting to only 0%. Unfortunately, none of our wishes have been fulfilled. With a reassuring smile, I tried to convey my clear, rational arguments to her, hoping for her understanding. I watched Vivian's brain trying to navigate the huge mess caused by my exposure. Even though she had turned into a terrible person, it was obvious that she had great intelligence. In a short period of time, she managed to grasp the essence of the problem. In order to determine the results of the experiment, it is necessary to know the results of both children. Having just learned Benjamin's result, Vivian paused mid-sentence, and her gaze shifted to me with a questioning expression. In a hypothetical scenario, the experiment did not bring the desired results as our protagonist expected. Surprisingly, it turned out that the child of a 16-year-old man struggling with addiction to illegal drugs is already in the process of adoption. Hypothetically, this child received a happy upbringing in a middle-class family and is currently in his 2nd year of college, striving to make a career as a lawyer. If this man had managed to become a lawyer, he, in the humble opinion of our hero, would have been in a much better position compared to Benjamin. But as it turned out, Vivian did not share a similar point of view on this particular situation. As I watched her, it was obvious that she was considering strategies to achieve her desires. Do you happen to know which college he goes to? What is it? She asked, her voice full of hope. I honestly don't know this information, I replied. I mentioned that she could register her DNA and let him know her biological parents if he wanted to, but I assured her that other than that, our paths would never cross again. After all, it's all hypothetical, I concluded with a smile. Besides, I added, for the last 18 years, you've been raising your son with the help of a doctor who turned out to be pretty stupid. Let's not lose sight of Benjamin in this situation. Vivian muttered in disappointment as she headed for the exit. It was obvious that her loyalty to me and our marriage would only last as long as she thought it was the best solution. After leaving through the front door, Vivian turned to face me and said, Thomas, I sincerely apologize, but I need you to explain everything to me. I interrupted her before she could finish. Vivian, it's okay, I assured her. I believe that countless years of fighting Jerry with you, as well as raising a child who is not even ours, have made us equal. At first, Vivian returned my sincere smile with her own, but as she considered my words, her expression became more and more gloomy. She seemed about to ask how I knew the details of their troubled marriage, but I quickly turned to the TV and closed the door before she could say a word. Maybe I'll be able to catch the second half of the game,